Hey everyone, this is James here, going to be talking about more Italian genre films today. Today, the topic is going to be a list of 20 must-see, non-Argento, Bava, Lucio Fulci, Gialli. So why make this list exactly? I've been making a lot of different lists. I made the kind of 12 essential Gialli list. I'm going to be making a list of no caveats, just the top Giallos whatsoever. And I should really make a deep cut episode at some point too. So this one is kind of in between those. So why make this list specifically? Well, the conversation of Gialli is really dominated a lot by the top directors, specifically kind of the Mount Rushmore, toss Sergio Martino in there as well. But in my opinion, there's a lot of different Giallis that are good and they're worth seeking out beyond those directors. So I did just a little bit of research before this episode and kind of sorted Gialli and kind of categorized Gialli fans into a bunch of different categories. So kind of the tier one, so the very, very surface level, I wouldn't even necessarily call this a fan yet. People that have seen Gialli that are basically greater than 20,000 views on Letterboxd. This puts it at about 12-ish films. The most seen Gialli, for the record, is Deep Red with about 107,000 logs on Letterboxd. And here is where you're pretty much going to get exclusively Argentos, Fulcis, and Bavas. So what's wrong with this thing is it gives you a very skewed view and very Argento-centric view of the Giallis. And Argento's Giallis, while amazing, and he's one of my favorite directors, they aren't representative of kind of Giallis as a whole, even though he was hugely influential. Other than the Animal trilogy and I guess Deep Red borderline, just about all of his Giallis come later, outside of the golden era. So you're going to get a skewed view there. And of the other two directors, Fulci and Bava, you have stuff like Blood and Black Lace and New York Ripper, both of which I would say definitely easily fall outside of the golden age, Blood and Black Lace coming earlier, and New York Ripper coming late as well. So you're getting kind of this very, very interesting view of very good films, but films that aren't representative of the genre as a whole, in my opinion. So the tier 2, so this is just one step up, greater than 10,000 views on Letterboxd. This expands the list, basically doubles it to about 25 to 30 films. You're basically getting a bunch more Sergio Martino, as well as the rest of kind of Fulci, Argento, and Bava. There's, a film or two left out there. I think something like the Edwidge Fenwick Bava Gialli doesn't quite make it, but you're getting most of the other films that they have done. And you're not really getting a ton of the other directors beyond those four at this point. A couple stragglers here or there, but for the most part, it's going to be just a very well seen Mount Rushmore Gialli directors. Notably, the slasher element Gialli tend to rank a little bit higher in terms of logs, so things like Torso. I think that's probably just because they are sort of slasher elements, so when people are searching for slashers, sometimes those films will come up as well. So this is where you're starting to get a little more kind of deep into fan stuff, but really you're mostly seeing films from those four different directors. Next tier up, tier 3, and here's where we're really focusing this list on, is greater than 5,000 views on Letterboxd. And here's where you're getting other directors. There's about 50-ish films. Almost all of these films have Blu-ray releases. This, by the way, is about the same as Eurocrime Capitalizio Teschi tier 1. The Gialli genre in general is just much more beloved and well seen than Eurocrime films. And you're getting your Auto Lottos, you're getting a lot of deeper cuts, Umberto Lenzi's, things like that. Next up, tier 4, and this is a lot of films, more than I expected, greater than 1,000 views on Letterboxd. Here's where you're kind of getting a lot of other stuff. Again, there's a ton of Blu-rays out for even Gialli of this tier that aren't super well seen. And then finally, tier 5, you kind of get the freaks that have seen stuff beyond that. The stuff with 27 logs on Letterboxd, 200 views on Letterboxd, things like that. This list really focusing on tier 3, but a little bit of tier 2, because we are allowing Martino's Giallos here, as well as tier 4. So there are some that definitely have less than 5,000 views on Letterboxd that I will be talking about here. Limiting it 3 per director, I make the rules, just didn't want it to become too Martino dominant. If I was to list just my favorites of kind of the non-Argento, Bava, Fulci, I could easily put 6 Martinos on there, no problem. There's a lot of different leeway on what to pick here. There's a lot of flavors. I suspect some people that are really into genre will be like, ugh, why do you pick that film? And I'll do my best to kind of describe why I like these specific films, but I think you asked another Giallo fan what they really like, and you'll end up with 20 fairly different films. There's not going to be necessarily a ton of overlap here. Okay, so let's get into the list. Okay, we're just going to straight up knock out the Martinos off first. I have Strange Vice of Mrs. Wardh. I've talked a lot about this film. It's a great kind of summation of kind of golden era Giallos. It's also a great summation of the earlier jet set Gialli that were popular before kind of Argento, Bird with the Crystal Plumage really took off. So it kind of really helps to bridge the gaps between those two. Great Edwidge Fenech, great Gastaldi. It's very clever. There's some, I think it's Austrian locations as well as kind of Spain, Spanish locations too. So just a really great golden era Giallo. Next up, I have another Martino. Your Vice is a locked room and only I have the key. This is basically him doing his variation on the Black Cat, and I'll be honest, I like this a lot more than just about every other variation of the Black Cat. And what I appreciate about Martino is while he did do most of his best Giallo work kind of in this very concentrated period between 1971 and 1973, they're all very different from each other, even though they will utilize a very similar cast and things like that. It's a very different Fenech role, and I think she's certainly up to the task here. Last up, the last Martino I'm allowed to put on is Torso. It's him at his most Hitchcocky. It's lighter in plot and things like that, but it's very clever, the way it's structured and stuff like that. I really like this film. This one might be the one that hits the hardest for me, so I really like Torso and would strongly recommend people check that one out. Okay, so now we are getting into non-Martino directors. First up, I have another kind of one that's considered a genre classic here, The House with the Laughing Windows. I think about 10,000 people or so have seen this. This one's done by Pupi Avati. This one really kind of combines rural horror with the Giallo, so definitely strong on the mystery elements. It's very atmospheric. It's almost full-core-ish in a way, too, just kind of with its setting and stuff. I wouldn't call it a full-core, but it does tend to blend in a little bit with those. It's a fairly late cycle film. I think it came out in 1976, so even after Deep Red. But it's a very good film. I think it's just getting a Blu-ray release soon, or maybe it's out already, I'm not sure. But very good film. Strongly recommend that one as well. Okay, so now we're getting into a little bit of the deeper cuts. Next up, I have Autopsy, 1975. This one stars Mimsy Farmer, who you might know from Four Flies on Grey Velvet, if you're familiar with Argento. This one's directed by Armando Crispino. It's set in Rome. For some reason, I thought this was set in the South, but it's really kind of a sun-struck Rome, and it's very atmospheric. This was done, I think, in the Forgotten Gialli set by Vinegar Syndrome, so it has been released on Blu-ray. There's some grossness to it too. There's like medical examinations, stuff like that. So I think it's a very strong Gialli if you can really get into the atmosphere. I think this one could be hit or miss depending on the person. But I think for me at least this film worked very well. So I did like it quite a bit when I did see this. Next up, I have a pair of Aldo Lato films. So this is film 5 and 6. No particular order here, but Short Night of Glass of Dolls. This one, some people don't even consider it a Giallo, but I use kind of the looser, more Italian definition of them, of just kind of like the pulpy mystery thriller sort of elements. This one's set in Eastern Europe and is really good at ramping up the paranoia. The premise of it is very clever, where we have Jean Sorel, who is paralyzed and slowly starting to gain his resenses and just kind of slowly recalling the story as it happens. Really great ending. Just a very unusual but strong one. In some ways, it kind of is similar to kind of the 70s paranoia films that are coming out. There's a lot of intrigue. The mystery elements are set up very well. Good use of setting, good score. So a lot of different stuff you would like if you like kind of golden age Gialli. Next up, I have Who Saw Her Die, which is basically the Don't Look Now of Don't Look Up, bad film. Don't Look Now of kind of Gialli. It's Venetian set, directed by Aldo Lato. It's quite good. This one stars the Bond guy, I think is it Lazenby? Someone like that. But it's very much a Giallo, and it works very well. I'd say of the two Lato films I'm talking about, this one is probably a little more conventionally Gialli. with like its setting, Italian setting, and just its soundtrack and things like that going. So if you are looking for more of a straightforward giallo, this one is very good too. Next up, I have another Golden Age one, Red Queen Kills 7 Times. This one's directed by Emilio Miraglia. I'm not a huge fan of his other giallo, Evelyn Raised from the Grave, or whatever it's called. But I'm quite fond of this one. The soundtrack was recently used in Immaculate. It's a great soundtrack, so I can't blame them for that. I haven't seen that film yet. But very good giallo. And giallo is often seen as kind of the successor of Gothic horror. You have the Bava connection. Bava, very well known for his kind of Italian Gothic horrors. And this one, you can really see that coming through. This one's German set, but you have like these great German castles and things like that. A little bit predictable if you're used to these things, but I think if you watch enough of these, then that's not necessarily going to be a huge knock. For me, at least, Red Queen Kills 7 Times is a very kind of comfort food giallo. Next up, I have The Fifth Chord. This one, while it also has kind of more or less a cookie-cutter plot, benefits from two main things. First up, it has a great Franco Nero in it, kind of in high crime mode, where he's a little bit unhinged in the whole thing, and he's a little bit of a loose cannon, very impetuous and not really calm, cool, and collected. And it also is perhaps the most beautiful Gialli ever made. Just really, really amazingly lensed. It's done by Luigi Bazzoni, who is a little bit hit or miss for me. I think a lot depends on my mood, but this is my favorite film that Bazzoni has done. Just like the blinds and things like that. I think this is lensed by Vittorio Storaro, who did Bird with the Crystal Plumage too, so no surprise there. Really, really gifted cinematographer, but all Bazzoni's films are very interesting visually. So, strong recommend for The Fifth Chord. Next up, I have Luigi Cozzi's The Killer Must Kill Again. This one's a little bit lesser seen. Good showcase of George Hilton. It's also very cleverly plotted. I really got into the plot of this one. It's one I'm definitely due for a rewatch for soon, because it's been a bit, but it lingers very fondly in my memory. So basically kind of a blackmail scheme to try to get a serial killer to do his bidding. Very good film. Next up, I have a little bit of an unusual one, and it's one that I have reviewed a couple of years ago on the show. That one is Libido. This one's Ernesto Gastaldi directed. A really good chamber piece, and if you're talking about Gialli between 1963 and 1970, so between Blood and Black Lace and Bird with the Crystal Plumage, you're kind of looking at a really interesting subset of films. I'm not necessarily a huge fan of all of them, but they're more influenced by things like Roman Polanski as well as Diabolique than stuff like Argento, because Argento had yet to direct stuff. So Argento kind of took that original Bava mode from Blood and Black Lace and brought that back and kind of added his own little twist to it. So this one takes place in between those eras, so very, very different. Black and white, low-budget film, a really young Gianni Garco in it. And yeah, it's a good one. It delves heavily into the psychology, just a cast of 4 people. Usually I don't go for those sorts of films, but I think this one's really, really solid. Next up, I have another rock-solid Gianni Garco giallo. This one more when his career has taken off a little bit. Smack dab in the middle of the Golden Age, the Black Belly of the Tarantula. Morricone score. This is just a very solid film. If you like Giallis, you're probably going to like the Black Belly of the Tarantula. It's it's kind of just classic golden era stuff. You have some of your classic Italian stars, so people like Barbara Boucher, Gianni Garco. It also has probably a little bit more of a well-developed kind of protagonist in Garco, who I think... No, it's not Gianni Garco. What is that guy's name? My apologies. Giancarlo Giannini, who was also in Libido. So I totally got those two names mixed up. The double G Italian names apparently confusing me today. But he was the star of Libido as well as the Black Belly of the Tarantula. A great actor. You'll see him in stuff like Man on Fire and things later. So had a really, really long career. Next up, I have Stagefright. So this is one that people will debate endlessly. Is it Gialli or not? It's basically kind of Italian owl mask slasher. I'm fine casting him as Gialli. Cherry Horwath does in his book. I think generally speaking, the Italian definition is a little looser. It's made by the Italians. It's a mystery, sort of. So it's good enough for me. This one's a very, very rewatchable film. It might not be top 10 material, but I think it's very good, very easy to see. Also very clever. It reminds me a little bit of Torso in the way that it's plotted. So this one is just one that you'll have a good time with. For me at least, another real comfort food Gialli. Next up, I have another pair of Gialli by Massimo Dallamano. First up is What Have You Done to Solange? Of the two I'm going to talk about, this one fits more squarely into the category. This one stars Fabio Testi, who is an interesting choice because he's not necessarily give off professorial vibes so much. More of kind of your Eurocrime action star here is what you'd expect from someone like Testi, so in the Castellari films or whatever. But yeah, this one hits hard. It's fairly heavy-handed, but it kind of focuses on the exploitation of kind of Catholic schoolgirls and just gets really, really deep into the nest. Very sleazy, but quite effective, I think, in what it's doing. Next up is a really great companion to that, What Have They Done to Your Daughters? This one came out a few years later. I forget if it's 74 or 75, but it's a Polizio Testi Gialli hybrid. I really like that combination. I think straight fans of Polizio Testi or straight fans of Gialli might get a little put off if they're not expecting that, but I think if you go in and kind of expecting this genre hybrid, it works really well. You have a really good Claudio Castanelli in here, who I think is good. The killer lurks with a motorcycle helmet, which is a very clever way to design it. Hacks around with a huge cleaver. Reminds me a little bit of something like the Hong Kong designs that they would do later on for some of the horror films that they would do there. But I think it's quite a good film. Okay, so next up I have a underseen one. Again, another one that I've talked about in the past. This one is Midnight Ripper from Lamberto Bava. So Gialli at this point had pretty much died down. There wasn't a ton being made. This one comes out 86, I believe. So when Argento is releasing Tenebrae and things like that, he is like more or less kind of one of the only few directors that is actually doing these types of films. A couple of the others that were doing them, like Fulci and Bava, but not Mario Bava's son, Lamberto Bava. So, Tenebrae, as big of a hit as it was for Giallo fans, and it's generally considered one of the best 2 or 3 Giallos now, it wasn't necessarily hugely influential in something like the way a bird with the clear steel plumage, and to a lesser extent, Deep Red was, because the Italian film industry was just a shadow of itself. So it wasn't really imitated in the same way. So you have someone, Lamberto Bava, who very close with Argento, worked very closely with him, kind of imitating that style. And so that very kind of techno beat soundtrack, as well as just kind of that very, very washed out white futuristic look. And I like it. I think it's a good Gialli, and I think it really is quite unsung. So Midnight Ripper, really good one. Next up, I have what I think is another bit of a deep cut. This one is Belle from Hell. This one's rural Gothic Spanish, so a little bit of a different flavor to it. So if you really, really like your rural Gialli, or rural kind of Gothic-y films with like castles and things like that, this one's a good one too. It's been a little bit since I've seen it, but I'm due for a rewatch here too, and it does sit fairly fondly in my memory. Next up, I have The Bloodstained Shadow. This is another Venetian set one, so kind of a good companion to Who Saw Her Die. It comes a little later, 1977, but it's pretty good. I recommend people check it out. It's been a while since I've seen it, but it was available on Tubi and things like that, so still pretty accessible. So 2 more left, and again, I'm going in no particular order. I have Nothing Underneath, which was released as a Blu-ray combo with Too Beautiful to Die. Also a pretty decent one, but I think Nothing Underneath is probably the stronger film. These ones are done by Stefano Vanzina. They are a late cycle fashion giallo. It's kind of like Blood and Black Lace was updated to the 80s. So it's not nearly as good as those films, but it's solid. I think if you're expecting a very, very 80s Gialli, this is like a pretty good one to expect. The Argento ones, while they give some 80s vibes, they're kind of their own thing. So this one, I think, is like, if you're trying to think of just the ultimate 80s Gialli, I think this would be it. And then finally, last up, I have Lindsay's So Sweet, So Perverse. Basically, Lindsay doing Diabolique and Polanski. Yeah, I wanted to just represent this era of Gialli. This one's pretty good. This is probably my favorite of those sorts. So yeah, it kind of this one stars Jean-Louis Trigonet and what's her name, Carol Baker. So a good cast, pretty solid performances, and yeah, some great twists at the end and stuff like that. So it's a pretty fun one. Don't expect a body count like you would from an Argento film, but I think it's definitely worth checking out. So 20 must-sees, in my opinion. Let me know what you missed. There's a whole lot of close ones that I could have put in, so depending on like my mood or what I came across in doing research, I could have easily swung the other way on a couple of these. So let me know what you missed. I'm sure people that have watched this episode are happy to see even more recommendations here. But yeah, there you have it. 20 must-see non-Argento, non-Bava, non-Lucio Fulci Giallis.